Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll stay true to time so we stay on time. My name is Natalie Guest. I am with the Magnolia Business Alliance. And I just want to thank you for joining us for this webinar today with Ms. Laurie Johnson with 4 Elements Coaching. Today she's going to be talking to us about team development. Before I turn it over to her, just a few little housekeeping things. I will make sure everybody is on mute during the call. That way there's no background noise. And then once Laurie finishes her presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. And I also want to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to provide that to you once it is finished. And we will also upload it to our YouTube channel as well. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Laurie. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Laurie, about team development.
You're welcome. And I'd like to tell you that I've always worked in functional teams and that this was a difficult presentation to create because I didn't know what dysfunctional teams look like, but that's not so. So I have plenty of personal examples about dysfunctional team development and creation and efficiency and so, or inefficiency, so I have some experiences to draw on, and a lot of people probably do too. But today we're really going to talk about you have to talk about, I guess, the dysfunction in order to see how to create the function. And unfortunately, most teams are somewhat dysfunctional, maybe not totally dysfunctional, but they have a lot of room for improvement. So during our time today, one of the things as a coach that I feel like is really important is to always look at the why, because we aren't necessarily going to be motivated to do something if we don't understand why we're doing it. And then we'll talk about the signs that your team might be dysfunctional and what you can do to develop a stronger, more cohesive team. And we'll do a lot of that while we're talking about the dysfunctions, but we'll also do some of that. We'll have some suggestions at the end. So let me start also by sort of defining what I mean by teams. So a lot of people think that when you're talking about teams that you're only really talking about those kind of really highly considered purposeful teams, like if you have an executive team, if you have a board of directors, if you have a sales team, if you have a development team, whatever that might be. And that can be the case, but teams really are any number of people that come together and work toward a common goal. So if you have more than one employee in your organization, even if you only have 2 or 3 or 5 employees, or if you have a very small committee that works within a larger organization, or a state team as a part of a national organization, then those are all teams. So they may not even be rigidly defined as teams, but it's really any time that more than one person comes together to work toward a common goal. And so that's kind of the definition that we're working on today. So why strong teams are important? And when we think about teams, we think of a variety of examples, like I said, in our personal lives where we may have served on a team. It may have been an athletic team, it may have been a school team or committee, it may have been a work team or a volunteer opportunity. But strong teams are important because they really divide the work. They focus on one particular aspect of the work in many cases, or they focus on all of the aspects of the work, but they just divide it up so that they're more laser focused on one thing at a time. Teams really do increase your revenue because you have the ability to do more with less of your own personal time and commitment. You can strengthen your ability to do things by adding other people to the common goal. And teams really help you to think outside of your current space, and they help you to discover things. They bring skill sets and imagination and ideas and creativity into the room that you wouldn't have had, again, if you were just doing this by yourself, all alone. So there are a lot of quotes about team development and team building and the need for using a variety of people in your work, but this one is one of my favorites because it really does sort of express that linking of other intellects, that linking of other ideas and skill sets and behaviors in order to really create a bigger impact with a smaller amount of work leveraged altogether. And when we look at a lot of the sort of best practices, if you will, in organizations and talking about managing people rather than leading people, effective teams that work well together really help you to focus on the bigger picture. They help you to look at the overall and overarching systems and processes that you need to create or stimulate in order to be more successful. And they, again, really leverage other people's skill sets and create buy-in amongst a larger number of people so that you get more things done and you get them done more efficiently and effectively. And what I think is one of the best things, because I love to travel, is teams allow you to get away once in a while. You know, you really can't be tethered to your organization, to your company constantly every single minute. Things are going to happen. You may not even want to get away for a while, but something might happen that causes you to have to do that. And so effective teams that work well without, you know, constant intervention and without dysfunction are really going to allow you to be able to do those things that you need to do outside of the office when you need to do it. And maybe the most effective and important way is that you're not going to be, your personal and professional brand, your company's image, your product is not going to be as sort of attractive to your clients, to your customers, to other people if you don't have a way of creating that buy-in internally. So, and we're going to talk in a little bit about one of the books that I'm reading now that I think is really great. It's a really great book about team development and some simple strategies, but it's a real illumination of how if the people that work internally for you are not working well and aren't happy and aren't focused and aren't feeling valued and aren't feeling buy-in, then they're not going to promote your product in a way that is going to, or your service in a way that's going to be most effective for those people that you want to bring to your marketplace. So dysfunctional teams create a lot more work. They create more stress. They create more turnover, less revenue, unhappy team members, and then they really create an unhappy leader or an unhappy manager. So that's definitely something that I think more people can point to times where their teams were dysfunctional than they can point to times where they were functional, unless they've had really great team experiences. Most people, like I said, can point to a particular position that they left because of dysfunctional teams, or a time when they were completely stressed because of the way that they were working with their other staff members or team members. Here. Okay, so we're going to talk first, as I said, about signs your team may be dysfunctional, but I'm going to first tell you, I guess, a personal story quickly about how I sort of entered into a very dysfunctional team without having any idea, but how I could have had an idea in the outset. So I was interviewed some time ago for a national nonprofit organization that had state teams, and I was interviewed by the state team director, the executive director of that team, and then I'm interviewed by other directors of other states as well.
But I had something new.
We need to mute.
What it was.
Hey.
Hello. If you can hear me talking, I can hear you talking too, probably. So if you could limit the background noise, that might be helpful. Thanks. So I was interviewed by other directors of other states, people I wouldn't even be working with, and then the person that would be my direct supervisor. I was told immediately that hiring me would represent a sort of another level of diversity that wasn't currently existing on the team. So my first red flag, I guess, should have been that I was being sort of told that the team wasn't working well. It wasn't functioning in an inclusive way to bring the folks in that they were really desiring as members of the organization, as volunteers, as people that they wanted to support, stakeholders that they wanted to support the work. So that was definitely interesting. And then when I came onto the team the first day, I quickly discovered that while they did know when the position was opened, they had no idea that another team member was being added to the team. So in other words, they were just, the four of them were just working along and reporting to this particular supervisor, but had no idea that there was a new hire coming until the position was opened. So there was no input, there was no awareness, there was no buy-in to adding another member to the team. So when I started work, I was constantly sort of reminded that they had no input in the decision to bring me on. So that was a communication to me that they didn't really value me as a team member. And I came on doing part of the work that another member had been doing, and maybe it was an ineffective or an inequality of the workload, if you will. Maybe she was working way too hard and it was impossible for her to complete all of the things on her strategic plan, but she didn't have any input in that decision or who might be hired to work with her. So it was a very difficult relationship for her and I from the entire time I worked with that team. And the dysfunction really was illuminated quickly on. It was kind of an us against her in terms of the supervisor's mentality. They had been working, a couple of them, like sort of three musketeers, if you will, and then there was another person that was kind of excluded from the group, and then there was me. So that other person and I kind of allied together and became friends, and became stronger colleagues, which also isolated us from the rest of the team. And so you can see where this dysfunction continued to really manifest itself, and it happened that we really had some huge and clear signs, and our supervisor had some huge and clear signs that we were not working well together. In the end, what happened was a lot of people just stopped working. Some people left. Some people sent grievances. It was terrible. So that is my cautionary tale and my personal experience. Yes, I think the team could have been salvaged and changed, and maybe it is at this time, but it was very, very difficult and very, very stressful. So one of the first signs your team might be dysfunctional is a breakdown in communication. And this manifests itself in some of these things that are listed on this slide. Most particularly, you can tell that there's a communication breakdown when when only certain people on the team are having those conversations with you, when you're asking for input and you're not getting it. That, kind of familiar, we hear crickets when you ask a question, when you, especially if you ask why a deadline wasn't met or why someone isn't showing up to meetings if they're mandatory or team events. Typically you won't get a straight answer or you won't get a clear answer. It's good to kind of, if you have mandatory meetings that everybody has to attend, it's good sometimes to kind of keep notes somewhere of whether or not, who did attend, and if they didn't, whether or not they took a sick leave or a personal leave day, because that's typically, if they're continually not showing up at a mandatory meeting, then that team member is not engaged and that team might be dysfunctional. So as I described earlier, kind of seeing that us against them mentality begin to build, cliques of people working together well and other cliques not working together with those other people, bullying in the workplace, those kinds of things are huge. So one of the things that you can do to correct that course is really understand each person. You really, again, we'll talk about this a lot, have to look at each player and their behaviors and their issues. And then in this case, you really have to begin to create some team building strategies, which we're going to talk about throughout, in order to change that. The next thing is, if you're aware, anyway, if it manifests itself in a way that you're aware of it, in an absence of trust, and that is you'll see another slide later where I really talk about this as probably the number one dysfunction of a team, the number one reason that people point to as a reason why they're not working effectively with each other. And you can see that manifest in a sense of dread when you announce that you're going to have another meeting, or when they you talk about putting people together in planning meetings or goal setting meetings. You see that they have a sense of unwillingness to be in the meeting space together, that they don't share with each other, that they don't know a lot about each other's personal life. Now, there is an oversharing that can happen, but if people are just really totally disconnected from each other in a personal way, that typically is an indicator that they don't trust each other enough to share those parts of themselves that everybody really brings to the workplace in one way or another at some time or another. If they're not asking for help and they're working individually all of the time. And this one, I think, is a big one, an assumption of negative intent in every conversation that people have, a defensiveness or an outcry of someone trying to put them down, or someone assuming that they meant something disrespectfully. When people are really assuming negative intent, that is a red flag for an absence of trust. So you create trust by really creating a culture of vulnerability, where people are able to admit mistakes, where people are able to say, I fell down on this particular task, I dropped the ball, I missed the deadline. When people are able to be really vulnerable and real, when you reward honesty amongst employees, especially when they are vulnerable and real, when you really reward them for taking responsibility and ownership of something, it goes a long way toward developing that trust. But probably most importantly, the way to build trust is to lead by example, and really take a look internally at how you show up, at whether or not you are vulnerable with your employees, and that you're admitting when you have dropped balls or made mistakes or not come clearly to the table with the best of intentions, or assuming positive intent yourself, when you are kind of cultivating all of those aspects of your life and sharing on a more positive and intimate level with your employees without building too much intimacy, it really will help you build another level of trust in your organization. People who work on teams where they have unresolved conflict are often just constantly resentful, and that resentment sort of has an energetic result for people that leads to a failure to perform. It's that whole, well, I don't know why I bother anyway, because we're never going to change the way we show up with each other, or we're never going to get past that argument, or we're never going to do anything differently, because they're focused back on things that have already occurred that were conflictual. Then they're pretty much not going to meet those deadlines, and they're going to constantly kind of vent or complain. They may not be constantly venting or complaining to you, but likely they are venting or complaining to somebody else, and that somebody else might be a coworker, which will form kind of a level of gossiping, or form cliques or alliances with each other, if you will, or they're complaining and venting to the public, to people who might be a consumer of your product or service, to people who might be your networking colleagues, and so that of course affects your personal brand. So this is huge. When people are talking and gossiping and really complaining about unresolved conflict, it's really detrimental to your company. So you really have to look for early warning signs, and sometimes it happens that it's been happening for quite some time before you can see it. But you have to intervene. You have to intervene immediately, decisively, and clearly, and set clear expectations. And those expectations may have to eventually come with a sort of an expiration date. If you can't get past this, and if you can't stop talking about these things to other employees or to other individuals or to me, then we're going to have to take further action, because it is one of the things that will erode the trust of a team, and most other team members are invested in making that conflict go away. When you're losing employees, especially in one particular position or a series of positions that have a commonality to them in terms of a team, then that is often a signal that you have some dysfunction going on. And again, turnover is one of the biggest reasons that people, dysfunctional teams are one of the biggest reasons that people cite for turnover. They either say they hated working for their boss, which is part of their team, or they hated working with their colleagues, which is part of their team. So they left because the stress was just too much and they didn't see anything changing. Now what happens, though, is that a lot of people leave that position and they don't ever give exit feedback on what happened, because they are afraid that they'll have to work with those people again in another setting, or they'll see them in town, or whatever it might be. Maybe they just are afraid of being honest because they left and they couldn't stick it out, or because they felt like the manager was just so horrible at his or her job that they couldn't fix the team. But in reality, the manager may have not had any real clue at how dysfunctional it was. I think really dysfunctional teams take some time to come to the attention of managers. They often look like they're kind of operating on status quo and everything's going fine, and it often takes a crisis, like a change in vendors or suppliers. It takes a natural or human disaster. It takes a shift in management. It takes turnover, whatever it takes to illuminate that to people. So schedule in-person meetings with your employees sort of regularly, maybe quarterly, maybe biannually, to assess their overall satisfaction. Don't just schedule employee meetings for evaluations, but also employee meetings should be designed to give you feedback about how successful they feel, about how autonomous they feel, if they feel like they have mastery, if they feel like they need some professional development or skill development, and about how well they're working with others and how satisfied they are with those relationships with others, and really give them a place for honest feedback, for honest communication, without some sort of fear that you're going to that their team members are going to find out what they say. However, and we'll talk about this in more detail in a minute, you do want to make sure that people understand that if there is a real problem with the way a team is functioning, you're going to have to illuminate that problem in order to eliminate the problem. So you illuminate to eliminate, and that is really huge for people to understand when they're talking to you. When you have team members that are withdrawing and you really sense that they're not connected to the group as a whole, they aren't necessarily invested in the work anymore. They're not as enthusiastic anymore as they were maybe before, or maybe they never really were enthusiastic or invested in the work. Then that might be a sign that the team needs to be developed a little more strongly. So if you have a person who exhibits less creativity and enthusiasm, then it's time to re-engage them into the team. And it's much like what we see with kids who are not engaged with their classmates or with their peers. It's very difficult sometimes to reintegrate people into an experience that has been very negative for them. But if you can share project ownership with a team member who hasn't maybe taken a sense of ownership in the team before, if you can find ways to illuminate their skills and to engage those skills into the outcomes that the team is trying to create, and help all members see how they each strengthen the team, to just really help each person to see, what area of the team they really function best in and what they bring to the team as a whole, and how the team would not function as well without one or the other or all of the team members. That's really important. And then to really, as we do with other people in our lives, to really share and be generous with positive feedback. When people do something well, then recognize them verbally, and in other ways, if you do that in your company, recognize them for what they do well. But also make sure that you're not, because I was a victim of this myself with this dysfunctional team I was on, make sure that you're recognizing all of the team members in some way, not just one, not just what people sometimes refer to as the golden child, right? Nobody wants to be the person who's withdrawing, and nobody really wants to be the golden child for very long either, because it does build resentment, and it does cause that person then to withdraw from the rest of the team, because they can feel that the rest of the team does not appreciate the way that they're shining with others. So really give a lot of positive feedback, but find positive ways to give feedback to every team member. And not the same way either. That's kind of important. It shouldn't sound like a broken record and, good job, good job. It shouldn't sound the same all of the time. It should be very personalized, and it should be very enthusiastically and genuinely given. A lot of teams or groups become very comfortable. They become very set in their ways. They have the same responses to every situation, and they say the same things. And in fact, they often are so aware of it that they joke about it. Like, people in teams will say something, well, she always says that, or they will repeat whatever it is that she always says in a laughing way. But oftentimes they just come back to the team time and time and time again, because we just kind of, if something works or we think it works, then we're just going to kind of keep repeating it. It's like, that shampoo, rinse, and repeat, shampoo, rinse, and repeat. That's a whole lot easier than really considering doing something deeper, doing something different, creating some new system or way of doing something. So it's nice to challenge team members occasionally in a respectful way to do something differently. I watched a movie not too long ago about a team that was doing the same thing all the time, and this looks at decision-making processes too, so it's kind of the same thing as this slide as well. It was a movie that was based on a true story, and it was this little city council, and they were voting on this one particular issue, and one council member voted yes for what their constituent was asking for, and the rest of the council was against it. And the first thing the other council members said to him was, "We've always come out with a unanimous vote." Now, can you imagine how you would feel if you were at a city council meeting every week or every other week of your life in your city or town for a year, and you noted that every single week, every single meeting, they were all unanimous about every issue? Would you think then that they had really carefully considered that issue? Would you wonder if they were just bullying each other into making the same decision, into coming to a group consensus, a unanimous consensus? So there's a challenge in coming to a consensus, but also in not always agreeing, not always succumbing to that group think that team members can develop. You can get stuck in place if you can't decide, but you also are not buying in or committing to something, to a deadline or to an idea or to a project or process, if you're not able to communicate your thoughts and your ideas about something. So both the group think and the lack of being able to do decision making are two ways of kind of that playing, with each other or against each other. So when you're not making decisions, the group doesn't feel successful. It doesn't feel productive. It doesn't feel like it's accountable. It's not measured, meeting those measured outcomes that were put in place when the group was created. So really trying to help them build cohesion and transparency, for them to be able to move forward, to be able to have those conversations about what's holding them back, to be able to, really effective teams are able to engage in lively discourse and debate about something, not disrespectful conversations, but really courageous, lively, and engaged conversations about something. So if the agenda and the way that the group works is to set a clear intention of what the group is there to do, and to set a clear individual intention for each meeting, and then to have a lively discussion about it, and not just say, yep, that's what I say too, yep, I vote yes, or we always did it this way, or we never did it that way, so we're not going to change, we're not going to do anything differently, then the group is not working effectively together. So effective teams are teams that argue sometimes. They argue respectfully, and maybe the word argue doesn't appeal to you, but they have engaged discourse and engaged debate about whatever it is that they are trying to achieve, and they are then successful in doing that. Talking about each other is one of the, to me, one of the most annoying pieces of a dysfunctional team. But it, again, happens very slowly. And even as a team member, if you allow another team member to call you and vent and complain about another employee, it will lead to that team member mentality that they have to report either to the team supervisor or to another member of the team what another person did wrong. You'll never guess what she did today. You're not going to believe what happened when you weren't at the office today. These kinds of behaviors are very slow to build, but it only takes one person who accepts that call and accepts that behavior to create a pattern of tattling or a pattern of venting and complaining. And that will disintegrate a team completely and quickly. And it's a pattern that's very hard to break. So managers, especially when they're aware that this is happening or participating in these kinds of things, managers have a huge responsibility if they want this to stop, in just asking that it stop consistently restating, reframing. So if they are continually calling and complaining about another employee, the questions reflected back to them are, this is not acceptable for you to call me and talk to me about this. You must solve the problem. You must work with your team member to solve the problem. You must be honest with your team member to solve the problem. And that's the only way to break the habit. And it is a habit that a lot of folks, very successful leaders, have admitted that they have allowed to happen. I mean, like I said, it's kind of an insidious thing. It happens one time. And quite frankly, we aren't always in like of an employee, one employee over another, or as in like of one employee as we are of another. In other words, we don't always like people that work for us. When we hire people or when we have interviews with team members, and if team members are a part of an interview process for new team members, we see generally the best of people. If you're seeing the worst of someone, you're probably not going to make the decision to hire them that day. You only see the best of them, and in fact, sometimes you see things about them that aren't even really the best of them. They're kind of a fabricated version of the best of them, because let's face it, everybody wants a job. Everybody wants to be hired. You don't go on an interview and say, I hope they don't hire me, unless it's, and then why are you even doing it? I mean, in the end, that's really not even a necessary use of your time. But we all go into an interview, at least initially, believing that this is a job that we might want to do. And if we get there and we discover that it really is like our dream job, we're going to bend ourselves to look like we are the best possible candidate for that job. And the illumination happens later, right? Whether you are or you aren't, whether that job is the best fit for you comes later. But we often just don't understand sometimes how we will work with others, and whether we like those people or not is based on a whole sum total of our experiences in our past, from childhood all the way up to adulthood, to where we are in that moment. We're reacting to that person based on past experiences, past feelings, and past behaviors. And so we have to really take a look at ourselves, and sometimes it's really hard to take a look at yourself and realize that you've allowed yourself to have those conversations that you shouldn't have had. In the dysfunctional team that I was describing earlier, I had this one coworker. She and I were kind of thrust together, and so it was kind of a regular habit for her to call me, because I worked remotely, for her to call me and say, you know, these behaviors are happening. And eventually I recognized that this was detrimental to the team. It was, if we were going to build a stronger team and a more functional team, she and I had to stop that behavior. And so I had to say to her one day, I think if we are going to make this team work, we're going to have to stop having these conversations. And she responded with a respectful understanding of what I had said and a commitment to doing that. And we both had the knowledge that it would be difficult, because it was a pattern that we were used to being engaged in. It was a mindset that we had about what we had to do in order to reduce our stress. But quite frankly, it was just encouraging us to feel more stress and to feel bad about things. So if there's any one area that I think is really maybe the most difficult, there are two areas really, and this erodes the trust, but it's talking about another individual in a negative way to another team member. If you have something to say, you need to be able to say it to every team member, and to say it in front of every team member, and you can do that in a way that is really respectful. And so this results too, blaming and talking about everything being someone else's fault. And oftentimes, again, it's a lack of trust and safety. It's a fear of failure based on past experiences. It's a fear of failure based on the team production to that time frame. And so you don't think that anything is going to change. But modeling accountability and ownership of mistakes, and really treating failure as learning opportunities. I can't remember now who it is, but she's the CEO of a large company, and I posted it one day on Facebook, but she had a whole video about how her parents treated failures as total opportunities for joy and for rethinking and reframing. So in other words, they felt as though if you didn't fail in some way every day and you didn't talk about it as an opportunity for learning at the end of the day, then you didn't move forward. And she credits that for why she's such a successful CEO now, because her parents looked at failure as the norm. It is what we do. We are human beings. We can't make it to where we are today without having done something that we consider to be a failure or a mistake. So treating those as learning opportunities and allowing people the space to grow from those failures, to talk them through, to really admit them. A lot of times I see, and I do this for clients sometimes too, if I'm doing consulting work for them, or I do this with my clients, coaching clients, I have them kind of go through a process of, what did I do that worked well? What did I do that did not work well? And, what would I do differently? And this is a very what-based conversation. So we have other conversations that go around with that. But a lot of times that's what people really want to dissect, is what went wrong, and there are definitely a lot of times we don't see what went right because we only see the glaring wrongs in what we were working on. And so we really do have to allow ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to move on. And teams definitely blame and shift responsibility when they're not able to do that. Collaboration and brainstorming are huge for teams, effective teams, and you have to really kind of sometimes listen to that. And one of the big red flags that it's not working well is when people use the word I instead of we. Teams use the word we all the time. Now, I do think that using I statements and I feel statements are ways of respectfully communicating that something has not gone in a way that worked for you. But I also think that when we use the word I more than we use the word we, then we're not engaged in a team. It happens a lot when people are first hired, so that's normal. Like, you don't always take ownership of a company at first, and sometimes you still refer to the we of the job that you had before, which is absolutely normal too, because you're taking some time to disconnect and disengage from that team and engage to this one. But if it happens after that person's been in that position for quite some time, then they're probably not engaged with that team. So really set rules of engagement for your team. Having the honest conversations with people and their different perspectives before bringing the entire team together is huge. So again, team discussions are not the only discussions you're going to have. You can't put a team together and then not have individual conversations with them about what's working, about their skill sets and behaviors, about what they need to do differently. So having those conversations individually brings them back to the greater we when they come together in a team, so you can try to help manage that process for them when you see it happening. When team members are not communicating, when you hear crickets, again, you have an absence of trust. When you're asking people to share and they aren't safe, then you need to create a way of engaging them in more trust. So again, asking them for candid feedback, giving them real and honest feedback about what you saw and what you experienced while watching the team is an entry point for increased vulnerability, and making that space real for people, making it safe, setting ground rules so that it's safe. You know, setting those ground rules initially. We'll speak respectfully to each other. We will allow time for every participant. I call that stepping up and stepping back. So the person who is oversharing needs to step back, and the person who's undersharing needs to step up. And if you write those rules down and you keep them in the team space all the time, then they're always reminded of them. An imbalance of the workload is a sign. If you hear people say it was just easier to do it myself, my daughter said this all through every team project she had in college, and I finally kept saying, if you dread team discussions and you dread team projects so much, you need to look at yourself, because what you might be doing is taking an inordinate amount of the workload in order to avoid trying to come together and work with your team members. You're doing them a disservice. And then scapegoating, or creating those subgroups and those cliques like we've talked about, really results in a breakdown of communication and missed deadlines and a failure to complete the work and to complete the work together. So you can see where these all integrate together. And then this last sign, fixating on past or present problems, not moving forward. I was telling one of my clients the other day, and the reason I use this slide is this. I usually use, and have used in the past, a little Elmo doll when I work with teams, and I need a little stuffed Elmo, and I hold him up, and Elmo stands for enough, let's move on. And I use that every time a team gets stuck, or every time a group gets stuck in something, if they are prone to getting stuck. And I really think it's effective, and everybody gets to pick Elmo up, and usually everybody laughs at Elmo, but they self-monitor and make sure that nobody overshares or gets stuck or fixated on a problem that they're not engaged in solving. My client the other day said she really doesn't like Elmo, so she suggested that she would use an Elsa doll, because if you haven't seen the movie Frozen, and I can't believe there's an individual in the world who hasn't seen the movie Frozen, but maybe, if you haven't seen the movie Frozen, Elsa's whole mantra, her whole song, is based on the words "let it go." So you could use Elsa too. But really helping a team get past something that they just keep talking to death is a huge way of getting them to a more functional way of being with each other. Now, Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it is called a leadership fable. I think he has a couple of leadership fables, but this is what he considers to be the 5 dysfunctional areas of a team, and you can see what we've talked about is present in all of those those tiers. But the absence of trust really is the base tier. That is the one thing that has to change in order for the other things to start to move forward. So that is really the biggest area of dysfunction and the underlying reason that most teams are ineffective. So it shows up when your member of your team really feels as though they're unable to fully be themselves, to make mistakes, to share ideas, and contribute to the organization as a whole. They don't think their opinion matters, they don't feel valued, and they're not able to share anything that they feel will bring them some sort of sense that they're being integrated into the rest of the team. So that's a huge piece. So the number one way to improve your team is to begin to build trust. The number two way to improve your team is to really begin to respect other team members, and that looks like eliminating gossiping or tattling or conversations, side conversations with people that should not be involved in those side conversations with you. Now, if you have an HR manager that you're talking about specific details of a person's personal development or their ability to perform, that's different. If you're talking about an employee committing a crime, that's different. But really, general respect and giving what you expect in return is huge, that golden rule. And then modeling, again, and I always like to tell people, Gandhi did not say, be the change you want to see in the world. I'm not sure who did, but it wasn't Gandhi, although it's almost always attributed to Gandhi. But really the best way to change your team is to model the behaviors and skills that you want them to bring to your organization and to your team. You really want to have those reflective moments with yourself to really see what you need to change. And it does start with you. It starts with every member of the team, but it starts with you if you are the one that is working with your team. So these are some of the traits of effective teams, and they're quite frankly, the opposite of what we talked about. So they're not, too much of a surprise to you at this point, but they do call out inefficiencies or unproductive ways in a respectful manner. And again, they're passionate and unguarded when they discuss issues, but they are respectful in that way. So I think meetings that are compelling and are engaging are meetings where people have balls that they can toss to each other for ideas, where people have spaces where they can write things, scribble things, throw things, play with toys, whatever it is that they need to do to be able to think and to be engaged with each other and to be committed to what they're doing, and to really set the tone for that commitment, even if there might be a disagreement throughout the meeting. And expect that there will be, because we're not all carbon copies of each other. This book I'm reading that I said that I love is called Creating the Magic, 10 Common Sense Leadership Strategies from a Life at Disney. And one of the things he says is their acronym that they go by in most of their Disney Institute trainings and in their work with their cast members and their directors is that they respect, appreciate, and value everyone. And I know sometimes that's difficult, especially if you come to a team that you didn't hire or you weren't part of the development of. It's not always easy to feel that way about every individual, but you have to come to some kind of solution in order to be able to do that. And he says that all leaders and team members agree to make each other feel special, to treat one another as individuals, to respect, again, and to be knowledgeable about their work and to be knowledgeable about the way that they share their work with others. So that means that when you have those conversations with other people, that they will understand that that's the culture of your organization. So make sure and that they all know it. Value everybody equally. Everybody has a voice. Be really sincere with people, because honestly, people can tell when you're not sincere. I can tell when I'm not being sincere. If I smile at someone in passing and I'm in a hurry, I can tell if that smile is genuine or it's just something that I think was expected of me. Make yourself available a lot. so that, a lot of people call that an open door policy, but really, set boundaries for yourself, but make yourself available and accessible. Stand up for people that are feeling excluded, reintegrate them into the team as quickly and as easily as you can. Treat people the way you want your customers or your clients to be treated. You want to, again, make your client feel special and like they're an individual and that they're respected and that you know them and you know what you need to know in order to be able to serve them. I think every meeting is either for one purpose or another. It's an informational meeting or it's a problem-solving meeting. So I think it's good to start every team meeting, every staff meeting with that sort of overall purpose. Today we've come together to share information, or today we've come together to solve this problem. And to be able to set the ground rules for what the meeting is about, to identify the goals. What are we going to have when we walk away from our meeting today? I don't ever want my teams or my clients to walk away from a time with me and feel like we didn't do what they wanted to do, that we didn't complete the goal or the process that they agreed upon at the start of our time together. And that should be the case for all of your team members. And really only invite those people that need to be there, because that happens a lot. If not everybody needs that information and it can be trickled down in a different way, then that's how that should go. If not everybody is invested in solving that problem, then they shouldn't all be there, because they're going to feel as though they aren't qualified or they're not valued because they're not sharing, or they don't know what to share because they're in the wrong meeting at the wrong time. And then I think one of the things that Lee Cockrell shares in the book, Creating the Magic, is to get as flat as you can. You can't ask people to take responsibility for something without giving them the authority to do it. So if they have a new idea or a new system or process to implement and they have to go through 10 people in order to do that, you're not flat. So responsibility and authority go together. So make sure that if you give someone an added responsibility, that you give them the authority to do what they need to do in order to execute that task and to execute it effectively. And then always remind your team that anybody can take responsibility for change. It doesn't have to always be everybody, but sometimes it's just a couple of key people that take responsibility for change, model it, act on it, and respect it, and then everybody will follow suit. Expect resistance. We've always done it this way, or we've never done it this way, or I'm in such a pattern of doing it this way that I can't imagine changing it, which I have experienced before. Is typical, but everybody has to be excited about the prospect, have those courageous conversations, and they might leave. You might eliminate people. You might let people go. You might, there are casualties sometimes to creating functional teams, but when everybody is on board and everybody understands that that's the end result, then the things that happen as a result. But resistance is going to happen, but it is also futile if you're really committed to changing your team. And then you're never really done. It's always evolving, it's always functioning, and it's always something that you have to continue to pay attention to. You can't create a great team and then let it go and expect it to continue to be great, because people change, their experiences change, their stresses change, the economic climate changes, everything changes. The only thing we can always count on is that things are ever changing. People are going to change. Yes, you might be a lot of the same way that you were when you were a child, but your experiences have changed you. So your team will continue to evolve and change, especially because you likely will have people that leave. And they might not leave because the team isn't functional. They might leave because they got great experience from you and they're ready to lead their own teams in a bigger way. So I think if you're assessing and trying to get your team to a functional place, an outside facilitator is really helpful. And I certainly help people a lot with team development. I help people a lot, especially when they have teams where people are in sales or in, like, for example, teams of realtors or teams of people who are all sort of working for the common good of the organization or the company, but they're also working for their own individual sales and their own individual successes. And that can sometimes sometimes be a difficult balance for teams to strike. And so sometimes it really does help to have an outside facilitator. Yes, it can be expensive. I don't think I'm expensive, but it can be expensive for you because I don't know what your budget is. So, just there are some free resources available, and there are some other resources available that are not free at tablegroup.com. I missed the little dot there, so that's tablegroup.com. But that is, I think that's Patrick Lencioni's marketing page, and he has some free resources there too. And then he also has in the book 5 Dysfunctions of Leadership, he has an assessment that you can do that's really very simple, and I can also share that with you if you'd like, and I think I can share it in a PDF form without, just make sure that we give him all of the attribution, and I'll get some permission for putting that outside of the copyright, and see if he'll do that. So I certainly can do that, or I can, just lend you the book if you want to do that as well. But I really do think that it's helpful. So we have a couple minutes left, it looks like. Do we have any questions or shares? Anybody wants to bring anything up?
Anybody have any questions? All right, well, it looks like no one has questions, Laurie, but we really appreciate this webinar. I thought it was fantastic. Some really well done points made, for sure.
Good. See, I didn't get team engagement before we started, so I did get crickets, but no, that's okay. A lot of times people just really have to integrate the information, so I'm always available once they've processed it, and if they have needs to integrate it in a more practical way. It's one of my favorite things to do because I think it's one of the best ways to move an organization and a company forward.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Laurie. We really appreciate it. I'll make sure that everyone gets your contact information as well, and I will make sure to get the recorded webinar out by this afternoon. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
You too.